quick little addendum. I'll just say that really this whole thing of being torn between monasticism and becoming a monk, and as I am now, continuing in more of a intentional community setting or these other community hubs is it can really just be encapsulated as perhaps Thich Nhat Hanh's quote about the way out is in. And much like I found in my time doing my simple living stuff, dropout, whatever, is that I was really focused a lot on the external stuff, like not working. In fact, I used to talk about that a lot, where I was like, man, I can solve so many of my problems by just not working. But part of that is because I came from not very joyful work and working full time, when probably the more skillful means is to work part time doing something joyful. And that can be a little tricky to find, but usually if you pursue it long enough, it'll manifest. But because I often found, especially in the last couple of years of isolation, because of my lack of work, whatever you want to call that, it's just like almost an aversion to it, right? That can lead to isolation if I'm not volunteering and plugging in and just like socializing. So it's actually interesting. That happened a little bit in Portland too, where work connects people, commerce, trade, the market. Think about a farmer, even like Farmer Neil at Wednesday Farmers Market. It puts you into contact with people, and that's kind of one of the interesting silver linings about work and money exchange, which is quite the necessity, obviously, in our world. But it is interesting, like I said, on the flip side, because it's like, if I have no overhead besides just accumulating more savings, and I'm not spending money, then like, where is the carrot for me to leave the house and try and figure out money streams? So that's interesting. But really, like, just not working will not solve your problems, because there is such an internal world that's going on from all the mental formations and views and emotions and wounds and all the things, that even just by cutting down some of your hoops and simplification, oftentimes something else will arise, and now you'll start chewing on that. You'll start focusing on that thing that, suffering is kind of mistranslated. It's more of like discontent, or like not quite rightness. It's like having a wonky wheel on a shopping cart. And if you're really unskillful, all of your wheels might be wonky. And so I suppose the goal, like if you were an enlightened being, all your wheels would be true. You probably wouldn't even have a cart. You would ascend. But that's kind of the goal. And that's like the more mature, deeper work, the inner work, which is harder to pin down. Because while a lot of people can quit their job or change their house or change their community or whatever, but do they change their inner landscape? That's really challenging. And of course, it's not to say that external conditions don't matter, because they do. The whole, like, the grass is greener thing is true to a point, or not so much the grass is greener, but wherever you go, there you are. That's a bit of a trite saying in some ways, because, like, For example, me being here versus me at a monastery or an intentional community, that's a big difference. Or even back in my old home in Portland. Big difference in vibes and people and socializing, everything. So, like, it'll definitely impact you, external conditions. So don't just be like, I'm equanimous and it doesn't matter where I am, because it's not true. Gotta be real. But the goal with that equanimity is that if your practice is strong and you've done a bunch of good inner work, then like it's not such a big deal, or it isn't. The external conditions aren't going to hammer you as much because you're resilient. And that's one reason why I know my practice has been pretty weak over the years. And yeah, and part of that too is oftentimes when you can kind of hide away a little bit, like even what I've been kind of doing a little bit in the last couple of years, which that's part of my isolation. It's not necessarily, you know, it becomes like a kind of self-reinforcing loop too, but you kind of hide away because you are having a harder time dealing with external things, like even me going to town sometimes, I'm not very enthused by it because of just the traffic, for example, external condition and all that comes with it, and the story attached to it, and Babylon and the system, and it starts, the mind gets a hold of it. So external conditions are important, but the life hack, like the ultimate life hack through mindfulness and other techniques, is it's not be thrown about all the time. And so I think that especially is intriguing, because I even had this idea when I was looking into the Franciscan tradition over a year ago as one route. It kind of came to, because even the thing I was looking into too wasn't like I was going to go to like a monastery and do that. It was kind of like more of a, I'll get my like credential from afar or something. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. But then I would take that sort of guise or role or transformation to the garden or something like that. You see, and that's a whole different way of showing up, as opposed to this simple living guy with all of his flaws and messiness and imperfections as a human, versus someone who has a bit more ripening, more solidity in the spiritual realm, in the grounded realm, and then you show up a lot differently. Even just like even down the road, let's say Deer Park collapses in the economic downturn of 2047. Who knows, right? And then the only places that are left for all the refugee monastics are like, people's houses and other little random centers, or intentional communities, right? Intentional communities that are off grid, that are, bridging the gap between the collapse and the whatever comes after. And then, but you showing up as that, as an ordained monk of several years, and think about that in terms of vision. That's a lot different showing up for, especially if you're still holding to your vows and you're not getting swept up in like relationships and things, romantic relationships, which can sow the most discord and unease, as I've talked about off and on, and often said too. Like sometimes I lament my loneliness from just like a lack of romance, but I think part of that is that I got so built up to become a monk prior to going down to Deer Park, and then having those seeds planted while I was there, that it kind of messed me up not going full into it. And that's one reason why I have been out of it, partly because of that. And then especially the first few months when I got back, I was pretty dejected because I had built up so much hope that like this was my off ramp to more stability and ease and nourishment. And I come back to like just make it up by yourself, carve your own path, solo quest. And I didn't know what to do. Now, of course, I think, as I've said a bunch of times, I A, shouldn't have come back probably to my dad's house, and B, shouldn't have come back for so long, obviously. I could have pivoted and gone to some other community perhaps quickly. And then, I wouldn't be having a lot of these conversations right now. But here we are. So, so the inner work, right? The way out is in. The way to liberation, to peace and harmony is inner work. And that's really like the difference too from, I think, people that are younger and they get more wrapped up in their idealism and they want to like have their cake and eat it too, kind of, or like dismantle things and create their own systems when it might not really be in the cards. And, this is like kind of a standard trajectory. The rose colored glasses of youth give way to the harsh and sobering realities for some people. And even like with the whole Deer Park and like the money stuff, it's like I question myself. I'm like, am I selling out or something? Am I compromising some core values? I don't really know. It remains to be seen as I investigate it. But a part of that is just like, yeah, like realizing your limits of what you can do given the system and how it's designed and how you operate. Yeah, and then even, like I talked a little bit about this in the Are You Sure video, where it's it's like some of these places, these activist hub places, like they are concerned with like big grandiose goals, which I applaud them for, and I'm like generally on board with a lot of it. Um, you know, like the money system and the housing and the whole, all the systems, like totally reinvent them, which it seems like what's needed. But then on the other hand, like Buddhism and the monastics goal is to assist with that as well, but in a little different way. And also it's more about changing hearts and minds too. And also not othering, like this whole I talked about before, the whole ACAB thing really grosses me out. Um, and that's where it's like from the Buddhist angle and from the monk angle, they don't go there. No siree. That's antithetical to the whole mission of non-discrimination. All right, they're not giving a hard time to Trumpers, even though all these monastics would lean left, pretty much. Because they realize that people are just caught up in different delusions and different stories, and so that to me is very powerful. It's like still that inner spiritual grounding, and yeah, you know, and part of that inner spiritual grounding too, as an aside to this, I think, which has also come to more clarity over the last few weeks since I made that last video about Are You Sure, is that a couple things. Well, like the veganism is important, more important than I have realized. And of course, was a little spooked by some nutritional stuff, but I think I'll navigate it with grace going forward and still, figuring that out. But just that intention though of like really honoring life and and respecting it more. And then what the problem was when I opened up the doorway to omnivorism is that, well, there was a bunch of communities that I could go be at again, or for the first time I never even considered, which is a little bit of choice overload. Speaking of the choice overload conundrum. And but then I felt like, is that really great? Like, I'm compromising a core value just to have a little smoother path and more options if I need them. It's like I can only be in one spot at one time, so I don't know if it's such an interesting dilemma. But and I think about, like, the places like the garden stuff. I remember when I first heard about that place when I was hardcore vegan, I was like, well, they got chickens, and I don't know, like, they're not hardcore vegan like Sadhana Forest is. Where Sadhana Forest is so hardcore about veganism, they have like a cow, or they have cows there that are pretty much paid for by a hardcore vegan donor that's like, don't use any other animal byproducts. That's how he's not. Don't be milking them on the side. Just let them live their life in peace, which is a beautiful sentiment. But yeah, most intentional communities are off the land for a lot of reasons, like some very practical, and often just times from permaculture principles and tradition. And like most people not being vegan, they will use animals. Because like getting all your nutritional needs met off the land is a little funky if you're growing it all or you're buying it all. So I get it. And I was willing to make that concession. And who knows, I still might be in the future, but there's still something that doesn't sit right with me. It's like you're using a sentient creature that gives no consent, and you're taking from it either its life, even to some degree, which most places, well, not, I don't want to say that, because some places do grow their own slaughterable things. I mean, I have a buddy in Portland who has his own rabbits, kills his own rabbits. And it's like, man, that's hardcore, like wringing the neck of a rabbit and stewing it up. It's like, there's got to be a disconnect there on some level, right? Even though, like, nutritionally and permaculture wise, it's like, it might be wise to have some meat or eggs, but it's just kind of messed up in today's world. And maybe it's always been messed up to some degree. Domesticating animals and just keeping them as little slaves for meat and byproducts is kind of weird. We're just trying to do the best we can, especially given how things are nowadays. But so that's interesting too. If I think about it, it's like, if I really am going to hold dear to that core value of veganism, then the garden and other places like that are less appealing. They're less appealing. And sometimes having less choice is helpful, because like it just sort of, it orients you in a little bit clearer direction. Like even when you go to a restaurant as a vegan, like my dad got me this Burgerville gift card for Christmas, and this is right when I was transitioning too, so like it would seem a lot more exciting if you can eat actual, like, grass-fed burgers and all the other things there. But when you go there as eating only plants, you got pretty much one option: their plant burger, or you get a salad or fries or something. But there's kind of a beauty in that simplicity, where it's like, this is just it, this one thing. This is just the option. Any restaurant, it's like, you just scan quickly, boom, that's it. Here's my mindful eating option that's trying to cause less suffering and seemingly is nutritious, because, while people do have some challenges on it, there are still like a lot of long-term vegans that are hanging in there. Like I said too, maybe the loophole is to actually eat eggs, like as humane as backyard as you can get, and that might be some nutritional loophole to cover some bases, but we'll find out. And that's still actually an option in Deer Park because they're plant-based for group meals and most everything else, but they kind of have like a vegetarian loophole still. It's grandfathered in, so maybe that's wise, but we'll see. But then, so there's that angle. It's like, you know, and in some ways I thought it might have been kind of extreme because that was the whole reason why I stopped, or a big reason why. Because I was like, man, this veganism is pushing me to sod in the forest, which is kind of true in a way, because that's like one of the few places in the world that's just like the Mecca. And if you're like also like a moneyless guy like me, then you go there, right? And that may or may not be true, but that's sort of what happened in the fall of 2022 when I sort of was like, oh boy, I need to pull back. But in the same way, like, it's a beautiful way that was sending me there too, right? Because if you really hold to these wholesome values, then stuff will just land in your lap. Like, the only reason I knew about this place was that I was living with a guy who was super wholesome and vegan and spiritual, and he's like, yeah, I've been there twice. It's great. You should go. It's like that kind of stuff. It's like just dropped in your lap. Synchronicity in the flow, you know? I didn't have to go digging around for it. All this stuff. He's just like fell in my lap because you're showing up in a beautiful way. Easy. So, and then the other thing too, which speaking outside in the forest, which I really love about them, is they're hardcore substance free. And I've been substance free for like 15 plus years. Although I always bring this up as an asterisk, I did have mushroom tea at Rainbow in 2013. That was the only thing though, because I haven't had alcohol, or only tried weed twice in college. So yeah, for like 15 plus years, I haven't really had anything. And part of that is I just never really got into it, thankfully. But I just always realized that like the folly of it all and the terrible stain, especially alcohol, is. And so, once again, core value, substance free. Where does that lead you? It led me to living in a vegan, substance free house, which is like kind of insane that like such a place even existed. But it was just like perfect for me, right? And we really held it down, especially the substance free part was tricky. Because, like, you know, sometimes we know that some housemates will go out and have a couple drinks here and there, but it, like, you know, never, nothing in the house. Not even smoking, you know, cigarettes or anything. That'd be pretty gross. But that's an intention to have a wholesome habit and to hold it and uphold it. And other people appreciate it too, especially if you're recovering or you're dealing with issues, you know, you want a space like that. So we'd often have that too. But once again, it's like Buddhism. Very strong, especially as a monastic, on substance-free living, on not ingesting poisons and things. And of course, it goes even further into like the media and the guarding the sense gates, which I talked about, right? You're not ingesting these poisons of violence and everything else. Like it's all a substance, right? Metaphysically. It could be sugar, it could be pornography, it could be violent movies, it could be that you know, glass of beer, wine. It's just not. It's not wholesome and good and healthy. It clouds the mind, it poisons the spirit. And there's so many people that freak out about like teetotalers and you're not living it up and like, you know. But I'm like, bring back prohibition. I'm one of those guys, you know. Bring it back. But of course, that's not going to solve it either because you had so much crazy crime during that time and moonshine and everything else. But it's still like, it's such a stain on humanity and so many people struggle with it because it's so hyper-normalized, especially alcohol. I think medicinal marijuana is wise in many respects. I'm not going to knock that. Maybe even some psilocybin trips for rewiring the brain, that kind of thing might be helpful. But generally, like alcohol and the hard drugs and things, and makes me sketchy. And that's part of my problem with the Rainbow Family is that there's a lot of substance use there. The both times I went, it was a little out of hand, especially like people tripping on psychedelics and like that vibe. There's a certain vibe, party culture, tripping out. It's not my thing. And so, once again, the garden, because we're comparing my two options that are most present for me at the crossroads is like, it's substance free ish, but it's a little funky because, they have like a sign even that's like, no hard alcohol. So it's like homebrew's okay. People can get messed up on homebrew, especially when it's free in large quantities. And like weed's okay, which maybe isn't such a big deal, but like still, like that just sort of, it's a little bit of a gateway somewhat to that kind of vibe. It's like, I don't know. I've been around like a lot of chronic pot smokers, and it's just weird, especially when you're not into that. Changes your whole demeanor. Everyone's just kind of like baked, right? So who knows? But like, and then of course all the other psychedelics are, on the table as far as I know, because it's not like they're not. There's no heroin, there's no crack, and no meth, and not like and no like vodka and stuff. But and it's like, how are you gonna corral all these anarchists too? Like, are you gonna hold them all to that? Who's gonna hold them all to that? It's a little funky, as opposed to like these monasteries or these other places. Like if you were at Sadhana Forest and they found out you drank when you're off property and you were like a volunteer there, you get kicked out of the program. And I kind of like that. It's like, yeah, zero tolerance. Let's hold ourselves to a higher standard. So similarly, it's like, and I had a friend actually at Deer Park who actually smoked weed on campus, which is like the most bonehead thing. And they were actually on the monastic path too, which is like even more sad. So they're going to have to repair that if they ever want to go back there. They were actually told that they had to stay away for a year. But it's like, you don't dishonor that whole institution by taking in that poison. That it's not like it was just for, maybe they had some anxiety stuff perhaps, or like I don't know the whole story about what was pushing them to that, but you just don't do that. You find other ways to cope and to handle your strong emotions and your suffering. And there's obviously a beauty from a simplicity and a minimalism standpoint when you don't need pills and substances to cope with just living. Not to say that those aren't warranted in certain times, but there is a certain power and a like a nimbleness that you can have where you can just focus on different techniques and different things, different practices, different ways of engaging, where you can, instead of numbing out or something, or however you're dealing with it with an outside source, you create this, you can cultivate an inner calm, inner peace. And that's like, you can't, that's priceless, it's priceless. So it's once again, it's like being called to the higher, the next level of the mendicancy, kind of, because it seems like garden and some other of these kind of intentional communities, like it's sort of almost like, hey man, you can just be messy still, you can be uncouth, you can be, no pressure. You can, that part of what I hit against the wall when I was at Deer Park the first time, where I was like, this pressure to like go to the next level, it's real. And there's a beautiful nature to that, and you have to have the causes and conditions that'll allow you to even go there, to entertain that. But like, I apparently wasn't ready, and maybe I'm not even ready this second go around. But like, I think I'm working towards that next level ripening and maturing, and like being able to handle things better and resiliency. And like I said, like Ty says, the way out is in. So we look at things we can do in our inner landscape, the things that we can hold dear, our core values, our wholesome practices, and that's really the way to salvation.